Oh, it's springtime again, folks. My fellow cyclists, my driver buddies, my road neighbors in their cars and on the TTC or whatever. Hello, everybody. So this is about propaganda and I guess kind of psyops, sort of psychological operations, but it's about the propaganda that's used to keep cycling unpopular and to sort of express the opinion of hatred that the authorities and the state want to project towards cyclists. Like there's sort of this combination of how the state and companies and institutions treat cyclists, and like any oppressed minority. And that's the issue here is cyclists are an oppressed minority. It's ridiculous, but it's the case. And there's tremendous value in messing with cyclists. For the auto sector, for construction sector, for like infrastructure dealers and infrastructure makers and stuff like that, like because there's so much profit to be made in protecting the car as a transportation product and protecting its like the advantage that it gets because of how hard it is to not use one. So the problem was way back in the day. The auto sector decided we need to compete. We're going to need to play really dirty in order to get what we want, because what we want is total domination over transportation. This is kind of like sorry, I'm rolling myself a joint. This is kind of like their original sin, is they decided we don't just want the market for people who want to drive or have something that they need to use a car for. We want the entire transportation market. So we want to turn everybody's bike rides into driving trips, even if it's a downgrade for them. So every trip, every activity needs to involve driving, not just the ones where driving is actually good. To me, this was like a tactical mistake on their part, because when you try to shove your product into some place where it sucks, you end up with unsatisfied users. And to me, there's no justification for putting together a product and a system that people hate using. It's just going to backfire. Like, even if it's super, super profitable, it's just going to backfire. Back in the day, my sort of thing was all about computer operating systems. I really saw Windows, and I saw Windows as this thing that people are generally forced to use, forced to pay for without really realizing it. Like, you have to do a bunch of computer industry homework to figure out whether you need Windows or whether you need to pay for it. This is something that you pay about $100 or $150 or something like that when you buy a computer, and you don't realize that the cost of Windows is built into the computer. You don't realize that you never get a chance to decide whether you need Windows or not. And so that's kind of like, that's the computer industry version of this, where like Microsoft doesn't care whether people like their stuff as long as they use it. This is the same thing with the car industry. So because of that, I'm going like way too far back here with the background, but whatever, it's my channel. So what I notice is every spring, there's kind of a rhetoric offensive, but like a rhetoric campaign by the news media, by the police, by different orders of government, by the CAA, the automobile associations, and then also by some kind of cycling people as well, cycling activists and stuff like that, advocates. And every spring, it's kind of the same. It's just like, just as people are starting to ride their bikes again, if they don't ride their bikes in the winter, just as people are picking up a bicycle for the first time, if this is when they're starting to try it out, this is the time when, like, for the first time in 6 months, the roads are actually usable. Like in Toronto, they maintain the roads so that the cycling space is unusable from about September until this time of year, until April and May. They don't sweep the lanes until late April. So, like, for me, I was just like, okay, so I won't use Runningmead, I won't be using Annette, I won't be using Davenport, I won't, like, there's a huge list of official cycling infrastructure that is totally unusable 6 months out of the year. Because the city decides to do it that way, they have made a number of decisions which they know will result in cyclists not being able to use the road for half of the year. And then so they've done all this to kind of protect, like, this is my conspiracy theory about it, is that they're making cycling really hard to try to continue to protect the auto sector and the oil sector. But at the same time, they're trying to invest a whole bunch of money in cycling as kind of a performative thing. But it is also genuine. But I think is within the government, as within our society, there's a sort of a culture war going on. And so the government is like sabotaging their own cycling efforts. So they're keeping cycling seasonal anyway. So because of the way that the city is maintained and stuff, this right now, right these days, like this week, last week, the week before, this is when everybody's getting back on their bikes. And of course I've been cycling all year because I've got the, extremely good tires, which are $70 each. So I can deal with the debris. I still avoid it. I don't know, I'm not a seasonal cyclist, I'm not a fair weather cyclist, but still, I feel this part of the year really strongly every year because every change in the weather and every change in the amount of cyclists on the road is kind of accompanied by a change in driving behavior. The violent people get really violent for about a week and then go back to just being normal. The normal people stay normal, and fortunately they're I'm talking about drivers, and fortunately they're in the majority. The violent minority they always get really weird for about a week and then go back to normal. So every time the weather gets colder in the winter and a certain number of cyclists take off, the driving behavior gets weird for a week, then it goes back to normal. And every time it gets warmer in the summer and a whole bunch more cyclists show up, there's a bunch of extra road violence and then it goes back to normal. And also with each one of these changes, there's kind of a spasm of like media activity. Okay, I'm just gonna go smoke this and like come back and try to make this work. So this is this terrible Toronto Sun article that's kind of where I want to begin about this. And this is unrelated. The Sun website sucks. I mean, they have like videos auto playing and a whole bunch of nonsense, and like they're, it's just barely journalism. But it is journalism. They just suck at it. But so this is the first article I'm going to show you. It's an actual police officer doing really good anti-cycling, anti-cyclist propaganda. and then I'm gonna go through this CAA article, the Canadian Automobile Association of Ontario, because they deserve to be telling cyclists what to be doing. Okay, sure. Then I'm going to go through this David Shellnut article where our local bike lawyer actually engages in what I see as anti-cycling propaganda a little bit. And also, what is this? What the heck? What am I? What? Oh yeah, okay. The Cycle TO people did this great response to this terrible Sun article, and I'm really happy that they did this. You know, took a few years, but Cycle TO actually, now I have faith in them. Now I like them because they. I mean, you can ignore propaganda, or you can point it out, and people like me, we are tempted to point it out, call it out. And I really just I want people to see propaganda when it is in front of them. Because everybody's vulnerable to it. Unless you know what's going on, you're vulnerable to propaganda. I've been brainwashed with so many little things. Pretty much everything I get into, the first step to getting into it is like de-brainwashing myself from all the bullshit that I've been indoctrinated into about that topic. And cycling is certainly one of those things. So, go smoke a J, and then it's going to be about, the effort to normalize cycling and address the anti-cycling propaganda that is seasonal. And also, I just want all the new cyclists out there to just know what to do about all this propaganda, and also have an idea what they're facing out on the road if you're just getting onto the road. So I'm trying to defuse this bomb and disarm this bullshit, because it is totally weaponized media. It's weaponized speech. It's like, here's how we can increase the amount of cyclist fatalities just by writing. Here's how we can discourage people from traveling by bicycle just by giving them good advice on how to do it. So, this is going to be fun. Okay, all right, here I am. So, I've had my coffee. I've had my weed. I'm all ready to get into this. So, way back in the day, Cycle TO, I tried to bust them for putting out this hiring thing, this employment opportunity for people to photograph their events. And one of the stipulations was all the photos have to favor cyclists that have helmets. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is socially backward and stuff like that. And now I'm so glad to see they started their critique of this terrible Sun News article by confirming that nobody has to wear a helmet if they're 18 or older. And of course, the deal is that that article. Okay. Of course, it includes helmets. When you're out on your bike without a helmet, weaving in and out of traffic and running red lights, do you ever worry about the police? So, okay. They start by characterizing cyclists using kind of a typical complaint about cyclists. It's like if I was talking about drivers just by mentioning the crazies or whatever. So this is one strategy, is characterization. Let's see. So then they're saying, oh, the wish list from Toronto Police includes mandatory helmets. Oh, really? Oh, wow. Huh, okay. So this is kind of a bomb that they're dropping on us. So now the police want mandatory helmet laws. Really? You sure? Do they really want mandatory helmet laws? The cops? Really? Okay. So it's really nice for Cycle TO to reinforce this thing. Helmets are intended to protect people from falls, but do not prevent collisions, nor are they designed to protect people biking from serious injury or death in case of motor vehicle collision. It's crazy that they would. This is this argument is like so old. It's weird, and all the talking points really are. They're like really antiquated stuff. They haven't come up with anything new. There's no new good anti-cycling propaganda, so it's all just recycling old stuff. They really do a good job of debunking all this stuff. I mean, I can't, it's impressive. Like Cycle TO, they have good writers, they have good researchers, they have people who are totally savvy to propaganda, which is like, thank goodness. So that's great. This Toronto Sun article, you got to check it out. It's beautiful. They mention, lion's share of tickets were for improper bicycle lighting and having no horn. So, oh wow, surprise, surprise, they didn't bust a whole bunch of cyclists for failure to yield. Wow, amazing. I mean, the other thing, some people think there should be far more tickets handed out to cyclists, but it's a matter of resources. Like, I don't think they say in this article, by the way, the Toronto police recently confirmed that they're not doing traffic enforcement at all, and they haven't been since 2011. It's like, if there's neighborhood complaints, cyclists constantly speeding, ignoring four-way stops or similar, police will sometimes focus on that area. Okay, the actual version of this is recently in the debate about the street bike lanes, the cycle tracks, I mean. Objectors were pretending that the cyclist behavior in the area was especially terrible, and that nobody seems to be policing these cyclists. And the cyclist behavior wasn't terrible, but anybody can claim whatever they want about that kind of thing. Or people keep sort of trying to claim whatever they want about that kind of thing as if it's impossible to prove or disprove it. And then I keep going out and just videotaping people's actual behavior. And the actual behavior from everyone is almost entirely good. So it's weird. It's this disconnect of like, there's a whole bunch of things that people think they can just claim, and it can't be debunked, but it can. So the real world version of this, like, this whole thing is police responding to something like that by showing up and doing targeted enforcement on the area in some kind of like high profile but low efficacy thing. Like, they're not having an overall impact. All the cyclists who are actually like deliberately breaking the rules and don't really care about the right of way and stuff like that, like the actual problem cyclists are not going to be affected by this, because they know every once in a while they are going to get busted in some kind of like fish in a barrel sting operation on cyclists. And then the rest of the time they can just do whatever they want, just like the drivers. I mean, and the drivers basically know there's not going to be any of those sting operations. There's not going to be any crackdown on like drivers failing to yield to cyclists. There's just going to be a hardcore speed trap here and there every once in a while. Or the city's going to give up on the whole thing and just put in automated speed enforcement, and you'll just have to paint over your license plate so it's illegible. And tons of people have done this. In my half-hour commute to work, okay, it's 20 minutes, but I stretch it out and do a half hour to, take the scenic route or whatever. In my half-hour commute to work every day, I can spot like at least like 13 cars parked on these side streets where their license plates have obviously been deliberately obliterated, and drivers can do this confident in the knowledge that they're not going to get busted for it. Like, the enforcement situation is so bad, it's so non-existent, the drivers know they can drive around with a completely illegible license plate. and get away with it. So that's fine. And then meanwhile, they can show up and demand that cyclists be licensed, and pay their dues and stuff like that. And cyclists will show up and also take the side as well, because they've been trolled into thinking that cyclists have something to prove and that we have an image problem, and it can be solved by adding to our legitimacy by getting us to jump through hoops so that we're more legitimate on the road, and establishing the precedent of paying for one's right of way, which is really damaging, because then that sends the signal to drivers that they purchased their right of way on the road and their right to use the road when, along with their driver's license and along with their registration and all that stuff like that, when actually what they purchased was permission to bring their car onto the road and have the right of way with their car. So we got to make sure that they know that that's the deal, and that cyclists have already paid for our right of way by paying for the roads through our property taxes. And the thing is, it is pretty much, I can't find a funding breakdown for the roads. I can't find a document that says, for these roads, this is how their maintenance is funded. It's this much from the gas tax, it's this much from property taxes, it's this much from the provincial versus the federal gas tax, it's this much from these other sources. And it's also hard to do it the other way. It's hard to investigate what stuff the provincial and federal gas taxes are funding. I mean, it's amazing to have this kind of lack of transparency for what is being done with our tax dollars, but that's kind of a hallmark of Canada in general. It is really difficult to find out how much you are paying for something, or even ballpark. So, like, journalists end up having to do investigative journalism to find out, like, how much somebody on disability is getting from the average Ontario homeowner per year or something like that. So when articles come out about, like, oh, you are being sucked dry by these benefits and whatever, and other articles come out saying, oh, people want to be taxed more so that we have more housing, and so that, you know, disability and welfare payouts actually provide people with enough money to live. Nobody can actually check to see what they're currently spending on anything. I'd love to. If somebody has some document like that, and I just suck at doing Google research and whatever, and the 10 minutes that I put into this doesn't represent a decent effort, then okay, fine, please show me the link to the, you know, government spreadsheet that's published for the public to consume that shows me what roads cost. But so this is another one of the propaganda things, is like, in order to, if there's sort of the suggestion of a quid pro quo, there's a suggestion of, like, here's how we make peace. There's kind of the suggestion of, what is it, diplomacy going on, or, you know, something being worked out, where somebody's saying, like, okay, we're going to continue to threaten you and hurt you on the road, and we are willing to start respecting you under certain circumstances, and here's all the things that you can do for us to start respecting you. And I mean, we've been doing this exact same thing with our black people and our feminists and, like, women in the workplace back in the day, and trans people and gay people, every single, like, oppressed minority. We have given them some impossible thing to be like, here's how you can earn our respect. Here's how you can earn your legitimacy, is by doing this whole list of stuff. And they just make sure that all the things on the list are these sort of, like, okay, it sounds reasonable, but you know that this is culturally offensive. That's why you're choosing it. Because you're just trolling us. So cyclists get trolled into thinking, oh, I can achieve legitimacy, I can be respected if I make sure that there's a licensing program and then I have a license plate. And, or I can, you know, if every single cyclist just made sure to follow the laws, after a few years, the drivers would respect us and we wouldn't be getting attacked as much by them. The police would respect us and they would actually investigate things properly. And it's always just nonsense. You know, there's no way to satisfy the people who do not want you to exist. They straight up don't want you to exist. There's like this tiny, tiny, tiny little cohort of people who genuinely feel like, oh yeah, if that cyclist had a license plate, I would totally yield to them when I'm supposed to. Okay. Those are the people who think that right now the right thing to do is to fail to yield to cyclists in order to send them the message that they need to stop cycling on the sidewalk and make sure to stop at all the, you know, stop signs and stuff like that. So what you want to do with cyclists is, when there's a cyclist in front of you at the stop sign and they have come to a complete stop and they are slowing you down by a few seconds, you want to honk your horn at them and then rev your engine at them and stuff like that to just let them know that they're worthless and they don't deserve the right of way. So when cyclists do follow the rules, you gotta haze the living daylights out of them, because a bunch of cyclists run red lights and stuff. None of it actually is logical, because it's hatred. They're just, this type of stuff is just geared to drum up hatred against cyclists. That's part of what makes it propaganda. All right. I'm not going to go into the specifics of this stuff because you can just read this and then read the CycleTO thing, and it's mission accomplished. So thank you, CycleTO, for dealing with this. This is the most offensive one. I'm going to dig into some of the other ones here. So while I was looking for actual stuff, I noticed this this farmer thing again, and this is an old one, but it's this like anti-cycling article about how cyclists are destroying farming during the spring. You know, it came out last year as well, and it's just kind of, it's sad and effective and whatever. And it's funny, you know. So yeah, I mean, you know, people are considering like, oh, maybe this is the year I should bike to university. And then it's just like one article like this after another. Everybody's old complaints about cyclists. Right when people are deciding, I'm going to do this or I'm not going to do this. So they're doing a whole bunch of things at once, telling us cycling is so dangerous. Telling us cyclists have a bad reputation, bad rap. Telling us, I'm a driver and here's my advice about how to be a cyclist. The other thing is they make sure never, ever, ever to mention the right-of-way laws. Ever. They'll be like, drivers need to watch for cyclists and be vigilant. I'll be like, cyclists need to be careful and remember that they're not protected and blah, blah, blah. And they never do say, here's who goes first in this situation and here's what the right-of-way is. Oh yeah, I gotta check out the CAA one. That's what I got. That's the other really offensive one. Oh, and look at the context is, right, 2 cyclists were attacked by a motorist in Hyde Park last week. They asked that he leave the bike lane and the situation exploded. Oh, right, okay, yeah. So in the last couple of weeks, there's been, I think, two different attacks on cyclists who challenged some driver who was in blocking some bike lane. I mean, there's 2 aspects to this. Number one, this is the reality of what's going on out there, while the media is all freaking out about how cyclists are like the only people on the road who are not being subjected to enforcement or whatever. So they'll be complaining like, oh no, the cyclists, they're running over old ladies on the sidewalk and nobody's taking action. Oh my god. And then they're like, let's attack a bunch of cyclists. So now I'm going to try to find this bit of propaganda that the CAA put out about cyclists, and I'm guessing that it's not even going to be... Why is Miguel's... stuff on the... What? Did Miguel manage to post stuff that stayed on the... So Miguel is this activist friend of mine, and I'm like, what? Did he... Okay, I think I was looking at the wrong thing. Miguel, please join us in the fight for cyclist access. Please up your game in the I mean, Miguel's doing so much social justice stuff that, I mean, okay, so what are they telling people? Where's the cycling propaganda that they put out? Oh boy. Usually what they do, they put out crazy anti-cycling stuff just as these sort of ads. And anybody who's talked, who Facebook has identified as like someone who's interested in traffic or whatever, like I get all these ads for car mechanic schools and stuff, probably because I'm discussing cars and driving. So Facebook is like, oh, he must love cars because I'm complaining about, you know, the 10% of drivers or 5% of drivers who are really habitually violent towards cyclists. So Facebook is like, oh, well, we'll feed him the anti-cycling propaganda from CAA and stuff like that. Let's see. Remember... Okay, so on their main page, they don't have their anti-cycling propaganda. So now I'm going to have to look through my stuff to try to find it, I guess. Well, I can't find the CAA thing. I'll try to find it in my posts to the cycling groups. But they put up this stuff. People argue about it in the comments, so the comments are full of like hatred and arguments from, you know, between cyclists and drivers and stuff because it's public, but nobody can actually share it and link to it. So nobody can bring it to some group and say, check out this crazy post that CAA South Central put out about cycling, because there's no link. You can't get a link to it. Sometimes you can get a link, it's just a little bit hard. Sometimes you can't, and then they don't put it on their main profile. So they put out all this stuff that's kind of specifically through certain channels. They don't really connect it with their identity overall. And every single time I go online to criticize them for it, some cyclist will show up being like, they offer cyclists mechanical help. The CAA is great. You can't criticize the CAA because they help their customers when their bikes break down. Every single time, every time I criticize the CAA for some kind of cycling thing, people are like, but they offer roadside cycling help. How could you, you know, how... It's really feeble. It's like, you have been brainwashed. My mind to your mind. Captain, I must mind meld with him to disentangle the propaganda. I must use both my hands. I'm a big Star Trek fan, right? So I'm always thinking about this Star Trek angle on stuff. I mean, I'm trying to mind meld with you through YouTube to deprogram everybody's propaganda thing. It's amazing how much propaganda we're exposed to and how much of it is just related to like big, boring corporate conspiracies and like transportation infrastructure sabotage as a profession and all of the conspiracy theories surrounding it and stuff like that. And it's I don't know. I'm a conspiracy theorist, like as a hobby. It's a really fun hobby. I mean, it's like sociology, anthropology, history, tactics. There's so much interesting stuff going on with it, but the kind of conspiracies that I'm interested in are like the really boring kind. Like I'm not interested in the flat Earth thing. There's no COVID conspiracy that I'm interested in. I've never been curious about the JFK assassination, but is the government deliberately putting in bike lanes that suck in order to sabotage their own cycling support efforts because the auto manufacturers have been corrupting them? That's fascinating to me. I don't, like, my thoughts about chemtrails are, it's probably, if anything, it's probably just a whole bunch of secret, like, weather modification that we've been discussing doing as a climate change mitigation effort, and maybe a whole bunch of enterprises or governments or whoever are just doing it because lots of people could afford to do aerosol injection with planes. It's not that expensive, and so there's probably nothing interesting going on with the chemtrails conspiracy theory. But if there is, the theory I'm most interested in is the most boring one. And so I love this kind of stuff. So I found my Facebook list, my post where I listed a whole bunch of this stuff. But this is one of them from the Star. And it's the type of thing, it's like it gets reposted. So in addition to the new stuff that they dream up, which sounds exactly like the old stuff, it's like new rephrasings of old spin. And I'm sure one of these articles is going to include like the vehicular cyclist who doesn't want bike lanes or something like that, just to add that back into the mix. But and then there's going to be a whole bunch of others about how like bike theft is inevitable and it's destroying everybody's lives and it's impossible to secure your bike against theft and whatever. And it's a whole bunch of, cycling is so futile. Cyclists are so mean and terrible. They're getting new infrastructure, but they're not improving their behavior. So there's repostings of the old stuff. Okay, ultimately, I can't find the CIA South Central thing anymore. I'm looking through my notifications. I'm trying to find it. And Facebook is funny. You're not allowed to see what you've posted to other groups in a list. Okay, you're not allowed to search your own posts. Okay, you're not allowed to search. There's just like, it's not usable. Like people keep switching away from Facebook for the most basic reason, like you can't just save something for later conveniently and kind of think about what you want to say and then respond to it. You can't really, there's a billion different things on Facebook that you can't actually get a link for. Facebook, just the functionality of it is so bad. This is why people are switching. And the people at Facebook and the media and the public keep coming up with all these complicated reasons why they say that they are abandoning Facebook, like privacy and whatever. And really the reason is stuff like this, where I'm like, great, because I put it on Facebook, now it's in the void. But I did write a post that I did find about this. So it was the CAA with their usual telling our customers you're so vulnerable bullshit, instead of just reminding them to obey the right of way and drive normal, which is what would actually make the difference. And then I say, these are fighting words, what comes up next. It's like the kind of shit that back in the day the Nazis would pay journalists to write about the Jews and stuff. Same strategy, and hey, I'm glad it's not aimed at putting me in a gas chamber, but it's so silly to, and I mean, ironically, I'm saying gas chamber, and we're talking about vehicles that pollute like crazy, so sometimes it feels like a gas chamber. But it's weird, but it is like the same strategy just being applied in order to protect the value of cars, instead of in order to take over a whole bunch of land, kill a bunch of people, and totally change society. But it's the same strategy. This type of stuff. It's like what you used to see in American newspapers, criticizing the blacks and the Jew and whatever group, and what you still see in their weirder media about the homosexuals and the woke mob who's trying to get your child to who's trying to sexualize your child in sex ed in elementary school and stuff like that. Like, we could run an anti-driving campaign where we just take the stuff that those like 5 or 10% of hostile drivers who are habitually, deliberately failing to yield in dangerous and illegal ways all the time, and use their behavior to try to characterize the rest of the drivers. A bunch of cyclists do that casually, and I don't see the value in it, but cyclists do the same thing. Maybe we should every year, all the time, try to put articles into like the motorsports section of something, into the drive section of every newspaper. Every newspaper has a section that's just about cars and driving, of course. So imagine if we tried to put articles in every single one of those places where it's like, enough is enough, and then we talk about the really aberrant behavior as if it's what the typical driver is up to all the time, and as if it's their like breathing air and whatever. So I think ultimately, like, I've failed to show off these articles. I'm done making this video right now. I think I have made my point, but just check out the anti-cycling propaganda that comes out. Part of it is I'm going to dissuade you from cycling by pretending to be an authority about it, who's going to educate you about how you need to be doing it, and it just happens to be a whole bunch of advice that I know you don't want to do. Okay, you know what I mean? It's like if you really don't want your mom to get into computers or use them because she's just going to be asking you questions all the time about it. You don't want to talk about computers with your family. And so you're like, okay, Mom, let me teach you how to use the computer. And then you try to make it really complicated and terrible. And you're like, oh, I'm an expert. Let me show you. First, you need to go into the DOS prompt and type in blah, 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 because Windows is a terrible scam or whatever. If you want to prevent somebody from doing something by pretending to teach them how to do it. There's all these different aspects of propaganda, but I would say your red flags are, I've already mentioned a bunch of these red flags, but to recap, some of the common red flags are like, people saying like enough is enough, something needs to change or whatever, and then they say something like, oh, nobody's policing the cyclists, when yeah, that's true, and also nobody's policing the drivers. Look for numbers that are kind of out of context. That's another red flag. Look for anything that is promising respect with a whole bunch of requirements, and the requirements are a little weird. Anything where there's a bunch of good advice and then a bunch of advice that you don't really know how to evaluate, because a real common strategy is, if I want to do some damage, I gotta do some good and mix it together. So you get a bunch of good advice together that is kind of obvious, and people basically already know about it, or them finding out about it is not going to move the needle that much on mode share and stuff like that. But then you add in sometimes just a little bit of poison to the mix. So you can write a whole article where the whole purpose of the article is to deliver some point to make it seem like there's no right of way laws and stuff like that. And it's a tiny portion of your work. It's a little bit of the article, but the rest of the article is just stuff that is there to accumulate the audience. So you're trying to deliver one little lie or two little lies or something like that by surrounding it with a bunch of useful, important truth. Oh my gosh, somebody commented on one of the things that I better check this out. So have a great day, everybody. Have a great bike ride. Okay, before I go, I'm just going to say the actual cycling situation is the same as it ever was, except just marginally better than it was last year. Your actual cycling situation is that. The best situation for a cyclist is a nice, simple road bike with a backpack, and people are still sort of being brainwashed to think about a road bike as the one thing that you don't use for commuting, when it gives you what you need. So it's kind of like if we tried to make driving crappy by convincing everybody that they need to choose between a hatchback and a Hummer or something like that. Imagine if the minivan, the SUV, and all the other types of cars that are the most popular, imagine if they were all just specialty products that were way more expensive than they really should be. That's what the cycling situation is like right now. So the actual problem for cyclists is they're using slow bikes that take a lot of energy and are uncomfortable because they've been convinced the road bikes have been shuffled into this weird little category. So that's your actual challenge as a cyclist, is to break through the spin about what kind of bike you should have. Once you're on the road, if you're observing the right-of-way laws, you're pretty much fine. It's pretty easy to avoid, attracting road rage from the tiny portion of drivers who actually hate cyclists. Because we don't really have a reputation problem. We don't really have dues to pay or whatever in the eyes of almost all drivers. For almost all drivers, they're not fooled by these articles, and they don't even read them. Most people do not pay attention to any of this stuff. So the average driver that you're going to encounter on the road, it's easy to see all these articles and think, oh boy, this is going to impact my commute. And it will a little bit, but it's only going to impact the behavior of the 5, 10, or 15% of drivers who already suck. And so you can just avoid problems with them by yielding to faster moving traffic approaching from behind or whatever, just by getting off the road and waiting for it to clear anytime it's sketchy. And this has been my advice for the last 5 years, so it's really boring by now. But avoiding actual trouble on the road is not really that hard. Cycling, it's not really that dangerous. And a bunch of these articles are trying to say the same thing. A bunch of these articles are trying to say, as long as you do a short list of things, you'll be pretty much fine on the road as a cyclist. But there is a whole bunch of danger. But then they mention the wrong things, and they pretend to be authoritative about it. And it's dude, you're the CAA. Don't tell us how to use our bicycles. Why don't we get Cannondale to? Okay, no. Why don't we get the bike manufacturers consortium of Canada or some crap like that to put an article in the driving section of some newspaper about what drivers need to do to gain the respect of the public, what they need to stop doing and what they need to start doing, and then every single recommendation in there is either not actionable, or it's really offensive in some cultural way. It's kind of coded with some special meaning, or it's just doesn't make any sense, or it's just rude, or it's obvious and everybody's already doing it anyway, but we want to pretend that drivers are unreasonable in this one way that they aren't. I would never do that. It's funny to be for the average person, this type of stuff, these types of tactics and stuff are just so alien and stupid that a lot of people just don't notice it. They're like, why would anybody try to do this? Would the car companies really, would people really try to sabotage cycling by making articles that are not sincere and whatever? And no, of course not. That's stupid. And yeah, it is stupid, but people do it because it's profitable. The auto sector is there's just so much money to be lost with each mode shift for big city commuters. The Toronto, the market of when the city says, oh, we want to shift a certain amount of trips under 5 kilometers to away from driving by this time, that represents a whole bunch of cars just not being purchased, a whole bunch of gas just not being purchased. It's a huge attack on our biggest sector, our most profitable sector. Probably, I don't know. I'm just talking out my ass. So things like trying to convince everybody that road bikes are not for commuting is important, because road bikes are the thing that allows cyclists to break through that 5 kilometer rhetoric barrier and easily do 10 or 20K. I'm about to go downtown on my way into work. Okay, downtown is 40 minutes east. Work is 20 minutes south. I'm going to go downtown on my way to work because it's easy, because I can, because I have a road bike. It's not going to wear me out. I'm not going to be sweating or whatever, because I'm doing it in 40 minutes instead. I can get downtown to Kensington Market in a half hour, but I don't care about shaving 10 minutes off of this trip because it's 10 minutes. I could just make a 40-minute video instead of a 50-minute video. Now nobody's gonna, even watch the end or whatever. So, nobody's watching. I'm just gonna, quit this, start uploading it, go downtown, and do this basically 15 or 20 kilometer commute to work in the same amount of time it would take me by car to do this whole trip. It's gonna be more convenient. I'm gonna get some exercise. I don't have a lot of energy, and I don't need a lot of energy because I'm using the one type of bicycle that nobody is going to consider for commuting because they've been brainwashed. And also, the product itself is the affordable, easy to maintain, everyday, non-specialized version of this product has just been removed from the market. You just aren't going to get a cheap, reliable, reasonable road bike the way that you used to be able to. It's funny, back in the day they're like, oh, you want a road bike? Cool, we'll sell you a road bike, but we're going to make sure that the gearing is not going to work for commuting. We're going to make sure that it doesn't have any low gears on it. It's all high gears. So it would work for commuting, except there's no low gears. So, yeah. So fortunately, there's a bunch of fixies out there now, which kind of solve this problem because they're basically road bikes and they're pretty efficient. But they all have flat bars. I put drop bars on my fixie. It's awesome now. It means I can do 15 kilometers, 20 kilometers, no problem. And all these people on these so-called comfortable, so-called Dutch style upright bikes are the same amount of energy gets them 5 kilometers. So, my campaign these days is to try and convince people to use the sedan of bicycles, the pickup truck of bicycles, the minivan of bicycles, the normal bicycle that should be the normal commuting bicycle as their commuting bicycle. That's my propaganda war these days. And all this other stuff is just noise, but to the public who are not, wow, you're a transportation cyclist and you're not 100% savvy on the deep politics of transportation. No, for the average person out there who's just on Facebook trying to figure out how to be a cyclist, because it's not easy, because there's no good guide. For those people, I really wanted to detangle this. Anyway, love you all. See you out there. See you on the road. You know, I'll be doing 30 in the middle of the curb lane or hanging out waiting for it to clear. I'll be doing 30 on the side streets. Having fun with the drivers, sharing the love, you know. Don't believe the hype.